all these hopeful ideas of equality, but not give something to the very systems that can help us reach and achieve equality.
And you couldn't have collaborated with someone better for that on You Do You, Tiffany Haddish.
You do you, I'll do me.
Was not expecting that on a Jason Mraz album, so how did that happen?
I just asked her. I was a big fan. Strong voice for this song.
Wait a minute, let me stand up for my girls.
On top of everything else, you're also doing this amazing Omaze project.
I am offering one winner and a guest the chance to come to the Ranch to take a tour of our working avocado and coffee farm, as well as sit down for a farm-to-table lunch.
There's plenty of fun things to marvel and to pick out.
Yeah.
And
I want you to have it all.
I can't wait. Hollywood power players check their privilege at the door. The important conversation. And Jennifer Aniston's big friend's confession. That's next.
Travel consideration provided by...
Having dry skin is a struggle. Turns out, my body wash was the problem. But with Olay Ultra Moisture Body Wash, my skin went from dry and dull to visibly healthy in just 14 days. Better skin from a body wash? You better believe it. With Olay Body.
It was a hard day when my small business burned, but we rolled up our sleeves, got back to work, and helped thousands of Oklahomans find jobs of their own. It's not liberal policies from the coastal elites that will restore America. It's hard-working Americans standing with President Trump who will beat this virus and make America great again. I'm Terry Neese, and I approve this message because now more than ever, America needs to be Oklahoma tough.
They are the heroes, helping on the front lines. Here's one small way you can help them in return. Complete your 2020 census today. Census data helps communities plan funding for hospitals and emergency services. Respond now at 2020census.gov.
Who exactly is Stephanie Bice? In the state Senate, Bice voted for the single biggest tax hike in state history. Bice tried to amend the Oklahoma State Constitution to make it easier for politicians here to raise the sales tax. She's a political insider who backed a $4 million expansion of tax breaks for movie production companies. Who is Stephanie Bice? Just another tax and spend politician. Club for Growth Action is responsible for the content of this advertising.
At OG&E, we spend every day improving and protecting our grid because we know the critical role electricity plays in all of our lives, especially now as our homes become our worlds. We also know some of our customers' worlds have changed. You may be facing financial difficulties during these challenging and unpredictable times. We're here to help. Learn more about the options and services we provide. Visit OGE.com and let's find a way to power through this.
I'm David Hill. I'm running for Congress because I'm fed up with politicians ignoring us.
Paul.
They let this pandemic shut down our economy, and now they have no clue how to get it going again.
Dad, Paul.
Like Trump, I'm not a politician. I'm a manufacturer. I've been creating jobs my whole life.
Come on, Dad, Paul.
Okay. I'll stand with Trump and get our economy moving again.
Paul.
I'm David Hill.
Thank you.
What? bring more to the table with Fairlife Ultra Filtered Milk.
Hello?
David Stanley Chevrolet. We keep Oklahoma rolling with acres of certified demos and lease return. Call 800-565-8138. Get 50, 60, even 70% off original MSRP. Half off Range Rover Evoque. 60% off Chevy 1-ton. 70% off Mercedes S-Class. Up to 70% off now. Buy online. Safe and hassle.
This is a News 9 5th District Forum. This is a News 9 5th District Forum.
Good evening. We're glad you're with us tonight. Final days of the 5th Congressional District Republican primary are here as we are now just 6 days away from Election Day.
And that is when Oklahoma voters will narrow down the field of 9 candidates competing for the GOP nomination. One of those candidates could advance directly to the general election, or 2 could move on to an August runoff.
All of them are with us here tonight, glad to say, on News 9 to answer some questions, some of your questions included, on issues affecting all of us. That first question tonight, the candidates, you all say you support President Trump and his policy. So what makes you stand out among your opponents? The order of the candidates tonight, by the way, selected random shortly before we began this forum tonight. So we'll be mixing up the list.
Yes, we will. Let's begin, though, with Michael Ballard. Mr. Ballard, you have 60 seconds.
Well, we all offer a degree of expertise to the race, but what I bring to this race is I retired from the United States Army a few years back, and I've spent my whole life defending our liberties, our Constitution, and our way of life. And that's the reason why I've jumped into this race. Is I see the direction that our nation is going, and I don't like it. And I can assure you, we do not want socialism in this country. That's why I've decided to run for this seat.
Thank you for that. And we will go on to our next candidate, Charles Tuffy Pringle.
Yes. The reason I'm in this is because I'm concerned about our country right now. We are under attack by people who want to destroy our nation. They're using people and they're going in and tearing down buildings, and they're using it for under the press of a lot Black Lives Matter. And these people are playing tag with and they're just defeating the black people and just treating them. In other words, they're taking advantage of the black people and using them as pawns. That's what they're doing. And that's the reason I'm in this race. And one thing about it, tonight, everyone on this stage agrees with the same thing. We all agree on everything. The difference is, I will tell you what I'm going to do to solve the problem. And this is something that the other people can't do because they don't know how. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Again, the question, so what makes you stand out among your opponents? And we'll let Miles Rahimi answer next.
Thank you so much. You know, what sets President Trump apart is not that he's a business mogul, not that he is an outsider. It said he's a fighter. And I left the Navy to come back and run for this seat and stand up for the Constitution and fight for it. So if you want someone to go along, to get along, vote for one of my opponents. But if you want someone to go to Congress who isn't afraid to throw elbows and
If he thinks I'm going to go along and get along.
Candidate. It's important that we restore the focus on America first. And one of my proposals, because I'm for bold solutions to these problems we're facing today, is an immigration moratorium so we can focus on America and Americans first.
Okay, we'll just remind everybody that your mics are hot, so as other candidates are speaking, if you can just make sure that you stay quiet, that would be great. Again, every candidate will have 60 seconds to answer, and our next candidate that we'll talk to is David Hill.
Well, thank you very much. Like President Trump, I'm a businessman, not a politician. And I've been blessed to have tremendous experience in business running manufacturing companies most of my life. And with that experience, I've been able to compete with China, who has really taken over so much of our manufacturing, and compete with Mexico. I've manufactured in the U.S. with U.S. steel, U.S. stainless, U.S. raw materials, and we've competed and win. I started this race before COVID. Who knew that this disaster would hit our economy, our families, and our country? But now Americans have woken up just to the dangerous position that we're in, with China producing 80% or more of our pharmaceuticals and producing things for our health and our safety. I have the experience and the know-how to go to Congress and get American manufacturing working again, to get Americans back to work. I have the experience to bring high-quality, high-paying jobs back to our country. America has been hit hard with this, but we're going to be stronger than ever. We can come back, and we can win on the global stage with this economy.
Okay.
I humbly ask you for your vote and your support.
And we will give 60 seconds to our next candidate, Shelley Landon. Shelley, again, the question, so what makes you stand out among your opponents?
Well, the passion of patriotism burns in my bloodline. My forefather was one of those at the Constitutional Convention. My late husband, David Manuel's pen, he was a Doubleday editor, with his co-partner in writing, Peter Marshall, the son of the late Senate chaplain from our World War I and World War II time. His pen was hailed as the fulcrum of what literally spawned and birthed the conservative right-wing movement in the 1970s. As a junior writer on their series with the Crimson Cross, that burns in my blood too, to see our history come back into the forefront. I've also been the one that exposed the gay marriage battle, brought up all the news teams to that Boston State House and gave them a hard go at it. I've also gotten one bill, it was actually not a bill, but a resolution 550 passed with the United States Senate unanimous vote. I drafted it. I worked to get the sponsors, and I put the thing into high gear until we all worked together and got it passed. I've also had experience confronting China and many diplomatic relations to understand what it's doing to the United States. I don't have a learning curve in front of me like my other candidates. I know what I'm doing.
Ms. Landon, thank you. We'll have a lot to talk about over the next hour and a half. I want to give the next 60 seconds to Janet Barisi.
Good evening. You know, I am the most experienced of all the candidates that are in this. Not only do I have experience in passing legislation, but also in implementing it and matching budget to it and accountability. But I have a great deal of small business experience for 24 years, ran my own dental practice, and experience in the oil and gas industry for the last 40 years. So I understand healthcare and business, and I understand legislation very well. But I'm also, I've gone up against liberals. I stood in the gap for Oklahoma kids, and I learned quickly how to be tough. I know what's in demand of the nominee of this party, what Nancy Pelosi and Kendra Horn are going to throw at them, and I'm ready for that. But I'm also a very hard worker. I am a person that has been all over this district. In order to win this district and keep this district, you have to be in the district. I have listened to ranchers and farmers and parents and concerned constituents. That is something I will continue to do over and over again. I will not be able to work, and I will continue to serve if I have the privilege of representing you.
All right, thank you. And now we want to go to our next candidate, Terry Neese.
Hi, so much. I'm in Oklahoma and who grew
southwest Oklahoma, on the farm my granddaddy homesteaded, a town by the name of Cookie Town. I moved to Norman to attend the University of Oklahoma, but I left early because honestly, my folks were poor and I really wanted to start my own business. So I started a business with just $600 in my pocket and a prayer I'd make it through the first month, Terry Niece Personnel Services. And I turned that $600 into a thriving business that has found jobs for over 37,000 Oklahomans. For Congress. Well, I'm extremely concerned about socialism in this country. I'm concerned about what this country will look like for my kids and my grandkids. Are they going to have an opportunity to build business up from nothing like I did? And here's the thing. I'm not someone who needs a job. I'm not someone who's looking to make friends with the political establishment. What I am is an entrepreneur who is looking to get things done. So that's why I'm running for Congress, to use my skills as a principled conservative leader to help President Trump get America on the right track.
Ms. Niece, thank you. I want to let all the candidates know that we want to make sure we can hear everybody. So if you're not talking, if you don't mind muting yourself, that way we don't have any interference while the other candidate's talking, that would be great. And then when we come to you, just make sure you unmute it so we can hear you. It'll make things go a lot smoother, I think, and let our audience be able to hear you as well and your important answers. So let's finish up this. We have 2 more candidates to talk to. What makes you stand out among your opponents? Let's now hear from Stephanie Bice.
Well, thank you, Amanda and Kelly. I think the main thing that makes me stand out is I have a small business background. I had my own digital marketing firm. I also worked for the family business. But I also am a legislator. I've served 6 years in the state Senate. So I know how to champion our conservative values. I have fought to protect the Second Amendment. I have fought to protect life. I have found ways to right-size government. And I believe that my small business background experience, as well as my legislative experience, position me uniquely to be the best candidate for your next Congresswoman in Congressional District 5. I've worked with small businesses. I've listened to constituents with their concerns. I've read thousands of bills and written my own legislation. And these things really set me apart from the field. And I look forward to earning your vote tonight.
Thank you. And now, Jake Merrick, let's get your response.
All right. Thank you so much for tonight. You know, I believe that this is a cultural battle that we're seeing in our nation right now, and that's why it makes it so sensitive. Our nation is more fragile and more divided than ever before. And last night in his rally, President Trump called this an intellectual battle. And he said if the liberal left is allowed to continue, then nothing will be sacred and no one will be safe. He also spoke recently to a group of evangelical leaders, and he said that if they don't stand up and do something and take advantage of the time, then all of the things that he has been able to accomplish can be undone. And so while I realize there are a lot of very important things that need to be addressed, including defending our First Amendment, our Second Amendment, ending abortion, vaccination choice, and securing the borders, I believe we have to go back to the foundation, to our Constitution, bringing God to the center of the conversation. I understand this is a clash of worldviews, and one worldview will win the day. So we have to ensure that conservative voices rise up and are just as vocal and just as loud as the liberal left who's pushing the socialist agenda.
Okay, thank you all. We're on a roll now.
Now, our next question is about COVID-19, the pandemic. How do you feel about the administration's response? Is there anything you would do or would have done differently? And Mr. Pringle, we're going to start this question with you, and I remind you to unmute your microphone before you go. You have 60 seconds. Yeah, just remember to unmute your microphone. Mr. Pringle, it's your 60 seconds.
Okay.
There you go. You had it for a second. Try it again. I'll tell you what, we'll come back to you. Let's go to Miss Landon. And unmute your microphone, Miss Landon. Don't worry, it happens to all of us when we do these things. You'll get used to it. Now go ahead.
Yeah, I totally agree with President Trump. He's one of my heroes. And if you go to my website, landonforcongress.com, you'll see his thumb up right next to me when I told him in 2015 he was going to win before he was even the primary candidate confirmed. The one thing that I would ask when I go to Congress, I intend to evoke an investigation of this. Walmart is heavily owned by greater shares in China, and I have been in the streets of China looking at the Walmart headquarters there. They were deemed essential. Their parking lot was full. There wasn't any social distancing for a long time, yet churches were not allowed to meet, not even some of them with drive-in services. Our pharmaceuticals, one of my pharmaceutical medications had to go back because it suddenly was overloaded with the wrong ingredient. And then a recall came with a list of the danger and damage that was doing. And that was manufactured in China. So I would oust their pharmaceuticals. I would take a harder look at what was essential and try to get rid of this massive fear factor that I think caused more damage than anything else. Yes, we had loss of life, but I think that those things can be re-examined. What is essential and what will we do if something hits us again? That's the big question.
All right, Ms. Landon, thank you for that. David Hill, you're next.
I think that the Trump administration is to be commended. They acted quickly, and while Nancy Pelosi and the squad in Washington, which included Kendra Horn, was busy impeaching our president, China was exporting coronavirus to the United States. And while they were holding the sham impeachment hearings, the president was cutting off travel from the Wuhan province to the major cities in the U.S. You know, China lied to us. China did not tell us the truth, and they restricted travel from within the Wuhan district for the rest of China, but continued flying people from there that were infected to the U.S. and around the world. But when Trump cut off those flights and then cut off flights from Europe, you know, he was lambasted. He was called a racist, and it's just terrible how he's been treated, especially by Nancy Pelosi and the squad in Washington. So what do we need to do going forward? It's really very, very simple. We can keep people safe, and we can get America back to work. I've been doing that while we've been dealing with the coronavirus with my own businesses, and I'll help President Trump do that in the future.
All right. Janet Barisi, how has President Trump done with COVID-19 pandemic, and is there anything you would have done differently?
Well, I also marvel at the job the president did. You know, first things first, he saved thousands of lives by stopping flights that came from China when no one else wanted him to, and he took the flack for that, even during impeachment. He and Vice President Pence put together a stellar task force to coordinate everything from treatment, developing treatments, to developing supply chains so we can get things up and going. But there is something very significant that he did that I think a lot of people missed. Instead of saying, well, the government's going to be in control of this, the president brought in the private sector, and that is appropriate. That's when the innovation happened. That's when we were quickly able to get up to speed on manufacturing ventilators. That's when all of a sudden masks were being made. We were being able to develop everything that was needed in hospitals. That was done here with our U.S. innovation, and I applaud him for that and for unleashing the power of the innovation in the United States. So I believe that they did everything correctly. I think we now are very much smarter about this. And so using CDC guidelines, it's time to get back to work and put workers back to work.
All right, Ms. Breezy, let's try to all stay to the 1 minute timeline. By the way, you're doing a great job muting and unmuting your microphones. Candidate Terry Neese, how has the Trump administration done with COVID-19?
Well, I think the president has done a great job handling the crisis, especially when you consider the lack of information we had when the virus started to take off. The fact is, China lied to us about what was really happening. We were really flying blind for the first few months of this thing. And I believe the president has done an incredible job to keep us on mark and to start getting all of us back to work, and businesses must be opened, small businesses in particular. So great job, President Trump.
All right, Ms. Neese. Now let's go to Stephanie Bice.
Well, Kelly, it's certainly easy to armchair quarterback after the fact, but I do believe the president did exactly the right thing at exactly the right time. Not only did he bring a coronavirus task force together to research the data and give Americans a daily update on what was happening, but he also immediately sprung into action and addressed the economic uncertainty that was facing our country. He implemented the federal stimulus money. He added to the unemployment dollars that were going to be given to unemployed individuals across the country. He instituted the PPP program so that our small businesses across the country have the resources to be able to continue given a very uncertain time. So I believe everything that he did was at the right time, and I support his initiatives in continuing to try to get our economy back on track.
All right, candidate Michael Ballard, how has the Trump administration done? Anything you would have done differently?
I personally applaud President Trump for what he's done during this virus epidemic. I know the Democrats love to put the blame not only on the virus but everything else at President Trump and the rest of Republicans' feet. But let's be honest with ourselves. The fault strictly lies with the communist Chinese. They're the ones that provided all the misinformation. And President Trump acted, I think, very quickly with the travel ban and then moved on to other recommendations. While President Trump was putting together his plan, his travel bans and everything else, the Democrats were in the middle of impeaching the president. When he was recommended people practice washing your hands and social distancing, the Democrat mayors and governors across the country were encouraging their people to get out and do their thing. So I personally applaud President Trump for what he's done. I think he saved a lot of lives.
Out on your end, same question. How has President Trump done with COVID-19? We're going to go to Mr. Pringle, and then we'll come back to Mr. Rahimi. Mr. Pringle. Go ahead and unmute your microphone if you would. Now talk to us. We'll work on that for just a second. We'll go to Miles Rahimi for his response to this, and Mr. Pringle will come back to you.
Thank you.
Yes. I do believe that President Trump reacted as best he could given the information given. But there needs to be a serious question asked is how did we allow our nation's survival to become dependent on a hostile foreign power? We need to bring back our manufacturing of medical equipment and pharmaceuticals to the United States 100%, so our survival is no longer dependent on China. But we also saw our own American liberties come under siege with unelected bureaucrats putting restrictions on our Second Amendment in certain areas of the United States. And one proposal that I have to champion our Second Amendment is a blanket tax deduction for every American of $100 for range time and ammunition spent. So not only are they going to be practicing safety with firearm training, but they're going to do it with an incentive from the government.
Mr. Rahimi, now let's go to Charles Pringle. Mr. Pringle, your turn.
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
On what Mr. Trump should have done, there's nothing else he could do, but what I would do right now, I would cut off all the relationships with China. We don't need them. They brought this virus here to us to create a chaos to us so that the rebels could do what they're doing right now. I truly and honestly believe we're in a revolution and they want to destroy our country. And that's why we should end all foreign relationships. The United Healthcare, the United Nations, and any other one of these organizations, especially if we're giving them money. And I believe that's what he should do.
All right, Mr. Pringle, we appreciate that. If you'll mute your microphone there, we'll talk to Mr. Merrick. How's the president done on the COVID-19 pandemic?
You know, I don't always agree with everything President Trump tweets or his history. One thing you cannot argue about is the results. And he consistently delivers, and he consistently steps up to the plate, does what needs to be done in critical times. And this was a perfect example. It was one of the most critical times in our history, but of course, his administration. And he handled it beautifully, I believe. He shut down China, shut down travel to and from China, rather, even while he's being labeled and called a xenophobe and attacked by the left. You know, he ramped up the private industry to start, cranking out the PPE, the ventilators, the mask, and everything that was needed. And he ensured that all of the cities and the governors got exactly what they needed to handle everything. But then he was also sure to be strong with governors, and he supported communities of faith and came alongside us and said, governors, communities of faith have to be reopened. They are essential. And so I very much respect him for taking a stand for communities of faith, along with all the other great things he did in this crisis.
All right, Mr. Merrick, all the candidates supporting the president's job on COVID-19.
So much more to be said about COVID-19 as well. In fact, our next question comes to us from Oklahoma's only reporter in Washington. Here's our D.C. Bureau Chief, Alex Cameron.
Health experts continue to recommend that until there's a vaccine for COVID-19, Americans should social distance and wear face coverings, masks in public. Do you believe it's the responsibility of elected leaders to set an example with these practices?
Alex, thank you for that question. Let's start off with Janet Barisi. Your response.
You know, the CDC has set down some very careful guidelines, and all of us are well aware of the importance of wearing masks and social distancing, hand washing, sing happy birthday twice with my grandchildren and teaching them how long they have to wash their hands. So we've got that routine down. I wear a mask whenever absolutely possible. There are times when I'm out in public and I have no one within 30 feet of me. So usually when I'm out speed walking, then I don't wear one then, but I do my best to wear one all the time. And we all need to show that we're in the spirit of this. This is about beating a virus and making sure that we have a great economy that gets to rebound and we put people back to work.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Merrick, your response.
I do believe we should be an example to the rest, but an example of freedom, an example of individualism, and that we have judgment and common sense, and that we can know if we feel symptomatic, if we have symptoms, then of course you need to wear a mask. And I would take it further. You probably need to stay home and quarantine yourself until you feel better and symptoms go away. But I have a problem trusting the results that keep on changing, the numbers that keep on adjusting. And then when we have hospitals and doctors that are incentivized to connect cases with COVID virus, then I just question all of the results. And so I think we have to pass the ball back to the American people and say, we trust you, use good judgment and common sense. If you don't feel well, stay home. But I don't think that we should require wearing masks.
Thank you. And now for our next 60-second response, let's check in with Ms. Bice.
I think that it's important for everyone to take precautions. Certainly, everyone is in a unique and different situation. The immune compromised and those that are elderly certainly should be even more cautious when they go. But for elected officials, I think it's, you have to take personal responsibility. I happened to be at the Trump rally on Saturday, and I wore a mask because I felt like it was the right thing to do. So you can't mandate that personal responsibility. I think it depends on the situation and the individual. And I think people are being as responsible as they can, given the information that we have and the circumstances.
Thank you. And just for a reminder for everyone, just make sure your microphone's on mute until we call on you. Ms. Neese, if you will unmute your microphone, we'd like to get your response now.
So this is kind of how I see the situation with COVID-19. The shutdown has left us with a very real economic crisis, and we have a Democratic-led House that believes the solution to this economic crisis is the federal government. But the federal government is not the answer. If we gave the government $3 trillion, they would find a way to make $2.9 trillion of that money never see the light of day. So folks, the actual solution to the problem is getting small businesses opened up so they can get the economy moving again. And I trust the people of Oklahoma. I know they will use common sense. They'll wash their hands. They'll keep their distance. Wear a mask if you choose to do so. but we have to let them get back to work. That's the only way we are going to get out of this mess.
And we want to continue hearing everybody's response to the question, do you think it's important for elected officials to set an example, things like wearing a mask? Mr. Pringle, if you'll unmute your microphone, we'd like to get your response now.
Am I unmuted?
We can hear you.
I have said I am not participating. Am I unmuted? Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
I'm not going to participate in this COVID-19 hoax, and that's exactly what it is. And I don't wear a mask, and I don't intend to. This is just something that has been brought forth by the people who want to destroy our country, because this COVID-19 is nothing but a trial period to see how our revolution is going to go, so they can take over our country. And that's all I can say about that.
Okay, the next.
And I'm not going to participate in it.
Okay, thank you for your response. The next next 60-second response will go to Miss Landon.
Well, if you go on my website or my Facebook, you'll see the masks with my logo, Landon for Congress. And I wore one and had it hanging on my jacket at the Trump rally. But there are times when I don't feel that it's necessary, when we're with family members or people that we know have not been infected or not exposed, and we're doing our social distancing. I was at a meeting that Grover Norquist held on Capitol Hill just before the lockdown happened with the COVID-19 restrictions. And I was with White House aides and others, and we were discussing technologies that the CDC had been presented with. And these technologies killed the MRSA disease, SARS, black mold, and there are other technologies I've been listening to, and nobody moved fast enough on Capitol Hill to stop what was coming. And perhaps that could have been done. Also, I was there lobbying against the Real ID, and I'm very much against the RFID sticker that the WHO, the World Health Organization, is proposing with the vaccine being mandatory. Every time you give anybody a vaccine, you're giving a little tiny piece of the virus, so their immune system will build against it. If they want to volunteer, that's fine, but use an old-fashioned inoculation needle, throw it away, and don't put an RFID chip in my hand.
Okay, next 60-second response will go to Mr. Ballard.
Not with just only the virus, but I believe that government officials, bureaucrats, people that hold position of authority should always lead by example, not with everything. But with that being said, we are supposed to be a constitutional republic. And now if you're for liberty and personal freedoms and everything, it should be up to the individual if they choose to wear a mask or something. But as far as the government, they should lead by example.
Okay, Mr. Rahimi, your response now.
Obviously, with any infectious disease that is coming across our border, I think elected leaders should show resolve and responsibility. But I think it's important to realize that unelected bureaucrats are putting restrictions on small businesses that don't allow them to open up and pursue their liberties. And then on top of that, with this payment protection plan, we saw businesses that took advantage of it. And if this coronavirus was more deadly than numbers that are showing us now, and they had to take advantage of it again, the money ran out. And it's crazy to think that the LA Lakers took advantage of that program while Bandana Red took advantage of it here. And if they needed it again, a multi-billion-dollar company took that money away from them.
Mr. Rahimi, thank you. Our final candidate to respond to this question, should an elected official be an example when it comes to social distancing and wearing masks? Mr. Hill.
Absolutely, your elected officials should lead in this and be an example, and it should go further than that. Rather than have martial law and require everybody to stay at home or tell everybody they can go out, there's a way forward for America that is smart and safe. I propose that people have access to information to where people can have to know what their risk is. They could be a short survey on the CDC website. You'd put in your age, your risk factors, the conditions that you have, and it'd give you a score from 1 to 5. If you're a 1, you're young, you're healthy, you have no complicating factors, and you can really go about your business. And if you were to get COVID, it's not going to be serious for you. All the way up to where if you're a 5, you probably need to stay away from people completely until there's a vaccine, because COVID could be deadly for you. That way we can get our kids back to school, our people back to work, and we can get our nation back on track safely.
All right, Mr. Hill, we appreciate that. Moving on to the next question and sticking with issues in Washington, D.C. We currently have record unemployment due to the pandemic. Do you think another stimulus or extension of the Paycheck Protection Program is needed to help Oklahomans recover? Do we need another extension or stimulus plan to come out? Terry Neese, we'll start with you.
That there certainly are some opportunities that the legislature, Congress, is considering at the moment. But I don't believe that the Republicans in the Senate will take that on. Again, the federal government is not the answer. In my opinion, we need to make sure that we get small businesses opened up so that we can get the economy moving again. And like I said before, I trust the people of Oklahoma to use common sense. But we have to let people get back to work. And that's the only way we're going to get out of this mess, as I said before.
All right, Stephanie Bice, do we need another extension? Do we need another stimulus payment coming out?
Well, I think that we need to give it a little bit of time and really see how the economy is doing. You know, we saw some good numbers at the end of May, but that may not be sustainable. So I think giving us a little bit of time to see where the economy is going first before we discuss that. What we don't need is another Democrat-led package that gives money to entities that don't need it, like a $25 million gift to the Kennedy Center. This needs to be another package that directly addresses COVID issues in small businesses and employers and employees across the country that are hurting because of this pandemic. We also need to think about our local governments that have been impacted, but it certainly needs to be something that is conservative and not a handout and a giveaway that the Democrats are putting forward.
All right, Michael Ballard, you have 60 seconds.
If the government is going to force businesses to stay closed and go against the Constitution doing so, then people should get a check. But I would much rather see people go back to work, get their businesses going up and running again, than I would see people getting checks. And some of the other candidates mentioned the fact that the pork spending, the pork that gets thrown in these bills, I totally agree with that. We should never have pork where there's money going to Planned Parenthood or the anything else, museums or anything that has nothing to do with the virus.
Thank you, Mr. Ballard. Shirley Landon, you have 60 seconds.
Well, 60 seconds won't cover all of the initiatives that I would put forth, but if the president initiated something, of course, I would be very much in the propensity of going in the direction of what he would put there. But I don't think another stimulus plan is really the answer at this point. I'm certainly very much against the abuse of what the Democrats have done with appropriations of money and federal money. I think instead you've got to look at Ghost Town USA that has been created by this economic, biological, in my opinion, warfare of this COVID-19 virus from China. And I think when Walmart is still open and you've got all the business going to that franchise and other franchises that are owned by overseas entities and companies, you need to look at what the heavy-weighted shareholder configuration is. And I think in a state of emergency, we can paralyze that. We can put them down instead for a while and say, let's get our own people back to work and our own businesses and make it hometown USA on every main street. And give us a bartering system where we work together. Maybe it's not raw cash we use. Maybe there are some things our forefathers did we can investigate and pull out of the archives of history as well.
Ms. Landon, David Hill.
You know, it's really hard to consider another stimulus package when the last one was so corrupted by Nancy Pelosi and the squad in Washington. They added so much money to unemployment checks that many people make far more money staying at home than going back to work. Well, if businesses don't have employees to bring back and to serve people and to do the jobs, businesses go out of business for lack of employees. And we've had several great businesses in Oklahoma that have gone out of business not for lack of business. They've gone out of business for lack of employees. So instead of giving checks to people and instead of handing out money, the federal government can attack this problem by encouraging business, by bringing the manufacturing back from China, by bringing essential things back to the United States that are for our health and for our safety and our security. That the coronavirus has been terrible, but I think one of the things that's come out of this is the American people have woken up to what we need to do to protect ourselves in America from China.
All right, Mr. Hill, thank you. Great job, and we appreciate you all handling your microphones as you are. Charles Pringle, you're next. 60 seconds on should we have another one of these stimulus packages coming through.
No, we shouldn't. I wouldn't have, if I would have been voting, I would not have voted for the second one. I might have voted for the first one. I think this taking us out of work is, as everybody has said, it's unconstitutional. But I'm finding that there's not a lot of people around here in Oklahoma. I have a hard time finding people for my construction business. Now, we're out building a house all the time, and but all of the people that are working in construction, they're working 6 or 7 days a week. So then there's probably some people who work in restaurants and maybe some warehouses that are out of work. But I wouldn't, no more viruses, no more PPP bills or anything like that. If it's not in the Constitution, I'm not going to sign it.
All right, Mr. Pringle, thank you very much. Jake Merrick, you have 60 seconds.
No, we should absolutely not have another round of stimulus money. With $23 trillion in debt, we couldn't afford the first two. And so I did stimulus money for my small business company. We have crews going, and we were slowed down because of the virus. And so we received money that kept us afloat and kept us moving forward. But I would not ask for another round because we've learned what we need to learn about the COVID virus. Things are beginning to move. Now what needs to happen is people need to take precautions, use common sense and wisdom, and government needs to get out of the way. Small businesses need to reopen. You know, I think that all along, they should have been allowed to remain open, and then let people use good judgment if they felt safe to come and buy and sell and trade. So I believe small businesses need to get opened, and the economy, the free market works. Get open, and the economy is going to rebound.
All right, Mr. Merrick, thank you for that. Janet Barisi, your turn. You have 60 seconds.
You know, I think we need to sit back and watch the effect of the first two stimulus bills. And if it stimulates the economy, it takes a lot to push out $1 trillion. And then after that time, we can make some decisions and take a look at very specific needs that are needed. Certainly, we need to go back to our small businesses and make sure that they have what they need through the PPP program to get up and get going. But I think we need to be very, very specific about it. That's why I support a bill that Senator Langford and Cornyn introduced today and co-authored that is specific for the energy industry. And that is the direction that we need to go. Because I can tell you, with the third stimulus bill, Nancy Pelosi and Kendra Horn are going to light that thing up like a Christmas tree with giveaways. Kendra Horn wants to get reelected, so she's going to be starting to give away a whole lot of money to a whole lot of people, and that's something that we don't need. I will never vote for anything that unnecessarily adds to our national debt.
Janet Barisi, thank you. Miles Rahimi, your turn, 60 seconds. Another stimulus package?
No, I would not want another stimulus package because it would require compromise. Because what we see are individuals just wanting just compensation when the government came to and shut them down and prevented them from pursuing their liberty. And these, even at the state level, we have issues where I was outside last week with some protesters who couldn't get compensated from the state level. We saw how long people were waiting for unemployment checks, in some cases months after. And so what we need to do is cut red tape. And we also need to oppose these trade deals that put capital first and small business owners last. And my immigration moratorium does that by allowing us to really focus on these corporations that abuse worker visa programs, that lose out on American jobs, decrease wages, and increase housing costs.
We appreciate all of you. We appreciate all of you staying on time, too. The 60 seconds, you all are really doing a great job with that. Yeah. You know what? We also appreciate all of our viewers. Over the last week, we have asked our viewers to submit questions that they want you to answer. And so our next question comes from one of our viewers. Robert wants to know, what actions will you take to reduce the national debt? What will you do? Janet Barisi, your response.
That is one of the principal reasons that I decided to run for this position. You know, we have to fundamentally change our behavior. If you think about this around kitchen table issues, friends, we have a second mortgage on our house. All of our cars have a second loan on them, and we have maxed out every one of our credit cards. The answer to this is not to do minimum payments on just 2 of those credit cards. We have to fundamentally change our behavior. That's why I want to support a balanced budget amendment. We must get rid of deficit spending, and we have to have a clear plan to pay down our immoral national debt, $26.1 trillion. That is over $78,000 for every man, woman, and child in this country. It's unacceptable. I have experience in office of getting rid of waste, fraud, and abuse. I know how to find it, and I know how to get rid of it. It is about increased accountability and transparency in how the money is spent, and I know just how to do that.
Miles Rahimi, it is your turn to respond now.
You know, Robert, when I was in the Navy, I remember one of the odd jobs I had was supply. And there was a chair that I bought that would have cost $80 at Office Depot, but through our government contract cost $360. This spending, I'm 30 years old. My generation's being footed the bill for this. It has to end. Our founders would be rolling in their graves if they knew that the federal government was the largest employer in the United States. I would love to go into offices in DC. What are you doing? Why are you doing it? How many people have to sign off on it? But really getting to the bottom of these sign-off jobs that people become complacent and then make your life more difficult through bureaucratic red tape.
Okay. Shelley Landon, what would you do?
I am for a balanced budget amendment. I think also that we need to do some very serious investigations in the halls of Congress, start there, and then let's see where else it takes us, against the OIC, Organization of Islamic Conference, the CIF-US committee that works hand in hand with them and other organizations in this petrodollar oil swamp. We need to look at what started that Gulf War and how much that's cost us and the organizations that were involved in what went on with those pipelines. There is an awful lot that needs to be investigated. The CDGS, Suez company coming out of Bosnia, Croatia, Russia, that has a lot to do with the liquid natural gas tanker illegal contracts coming through the Straits of Hormuz and others. Looking into what happened in Washington, D.C. when some of those companies were allowed to get those contracts. What kind of a danger is that bringing into our ports? I think that we ought to go with deep thermal drilling, and we ought to explore the new technologies that are available, work in Twin City programs with our one good Middle Eastern ally, Israel. I think we can clean up the swamp, look at the Federal Reserve, and see how that is affecting life right here under our shoe leather in Oklahoma. There's a lot we can do.
Okay, we want to go now to Jake Merrick for your 60-second response.
I'm unmuted. I definitely believe we need a balanced budget amendment. It's critical. It just only continues to soar. You know, I believe we have to end the Federal Reserve. It's been a rogue machine from its inception, and I believe it's time for it to go away and for us to restructure things without that in our future. I think we need to take a look at every bill and ensure that there's not built-in pork, as Ballard said, and the excess spending. I believe we need to consider all of our foreign aid. What money are we sending overseas into other countries? Because we need to be investing in America. We need to create more jobs, bring manufacturing home to American soil, employ and create new jobs here in America, which will stimulate the economy, and let that roll back into the federal government. I'm for implementing the fair tax and ending the IRS, which would increase overall revenue from taxes, and that could go towards ending our national debt. So there's multiple things we can do, but it has to be done.
Okay, yes. What will you do to help reduce the national debt? Let's hear now from Stephanie Bice.
Well, first, to reduce the national debt, you have to stop spending money that you don't have. And I'm the only candidate in this race that has had to address a state budget. And in Oklahoma, we have a zero balanced budget. We are a balanced budget state. So you have to abide by that. I've had to look agencies in the eye and tell them you're getting a cut. Numerous years, actually. It's not easy, but it's the right thing to do in many cases. So we have to start looking at every single agency in the federal level and finding the wasteful spending and reducing it. It's not an easy job. It takes a lot of guts and a lot of determination. I've done it on the state level, and I want to do it for you in Washington, too.
Michael Ballard, you have our next 60 seconds.
President Reagan once said that the government does not have a revenue problem, they have a spending problem. That's the reason why we have such a huge debt. There are so many wasteful projects going on in our government that should be cut to zero, like nation building. We should worry about building our own nation, not other people's nation, especially people that don't like us to begin with. Cut off funding to the World Health Organization, the United Nations, a lot of this foreign aid, Planned Parenthood, other organizations like that. I like the ideal, and I've already signed a pledge to a group that sent something to me in the mail about balancing the budget. I promised to balance the budget, and I also like the ideal of the penny plan. A lot of people have talked about that, and I'm for the penny plan.
Okay, thank you. Now let's hear from Terry Neese.
Well, we certainly don't have an income problem. We have a spending problem. And I would like to ask all of those who are listening out there tonight, how many of you balance your budget every month? Because I sure do. And I believe we do need a balanced budget amendment. I also think that we must cut bureaucratic red tape. This might not make me many friends on the Hill, but my goal in Congress will be to reduce the power of Washington as much as possible. We have a bloated federal government where unelected bureaucrats in Washington are making decisions that affect the day-to-day lives of Oklahomans. I experienced these unnecessary regulations and taxes firsthand when I was running my small business, and was even selected by my peers to testify before Congress on behalf of them. So I've been fighting against federal overreach my entire professional life, and will continue to do so in Congress.
Okay, we are talking about the national debt. Let's hear now from David Hill.
So every homeowner, every family, every business, even individuals, single people have to balance their income and their expenditures. And, they may do a good job or they may do a bad job, but eventually those things will balance out. Only in the federal government is there no reconciliation between what's coming in and what's going out. Congress is broken. Some of you might have seen my slogan, Fix Congress. I say that because it's fundamentally broken. Do you know the last time that Congress passed a budget and the necessary spending measures that go along with that? It was in 1996. 1996. That was a long time ago. And so we've had all these appropriations measures and all this spending. And what happens when you don't have a budget? Then all spending is on the table all the time. Individuals don't have that luxury. If you're going to buy a new car, then you might not be able to do something else. If you're going to buy a new TV, you might not be able to go on vacation. That's the way real people live. Only in the federal government is all spending always on the table. A budget, Congress doing their job, will fix that. When I go to Congress, I will demand that Congress do their job for the first time since 1996.
Okay. We have one last candidate to hear from on this question, Charles Pringle.
Yes, I agree with a lot of things that the other candidates said. I agree that we need to get rid of foreign aid. I don't know how many countries around the world that we're giving millions and millions of dollars worth. Now, my eighth cousin, who was president of the United States, George Washington, said that we should not get involved in foreign affairs of Europe. That's the big deal at the time. But we're giving money to Japan. We're giving money to Korea. Now, talking about somebody said about a chair costing $300 or $400. I read where they had to pay $500 for a hammer. And how about a $600 for a toilet seat? Now, I'm in construction. I build houses. And I went down to Lowe's and bought a full toilet, not only just a seat, for $59. So we've got to have somebody that's going to take care of the whatever you want to call the people in Washington and the people that think they can't be fired. And that's exactly what I believe. And if it's not on the Constitution, I won't vote for it.
All right, Mr. Pringle. Hey, we're moving on to the Second Amendment now, guys. And the viewer, Stephen, asks, you're all Second Amendment supporters. Are there any instances where you believe someone should not have the right to carry a gun? Mr. Ballard, we're going to start with you, and you have 60 seconds.
If I understood your question correctly, is there any time that someone should not be allowed to carry a gun? If they're a violent person in prison, if you're a nonviolent person, you should be allowed to exercise your Second Amendment right.
Short and sweet. All right, Mr. Pringle, it's your turn again. Second Amendment. Is there any time when someone should not have the right to carry a gun?
The only thing that I would say if someone is mentally ill or if they don't have control of their bodies and their thoughts, they should not have a gun. Other than that, no restrictions. If they want a tank, I saw a movie the other day with Jim Garner. It's called Tank. He bought a Sherman tank because he was in the Army, and crazy sheriff got his son in prison, in jail for a bad thing he got against his dad, and Jim Garner goes and gets his son out of the prison with his tank. And if you want a tank, buy you a tank. If you want to buy a 14 airplane, and you can afford it, go get it.
All right, that's an interesting concept there. Tank, we didn't think we'd hear about that tonight. Mr. Pringle, thank you. David Hill, you're next.
Well, we have reasonable laws in place where when people are violent criminals, when they're felons, etc., that they cannot carry a gun. And those reasonable laws are for all of our good. But I have to tell you, gun control from the left is not about gun control at all. The gun control measures that are being passed is about people control. You know, our Second Amendment gives us all kinds of great freedoms, the freedom to be able to protect ourselves, the freedom to hunt, the freedom to sport shoot, et cetera, the freedom to carry a gun. But, you know, the Second Amendment really goes way past that. The Second Amendment provides for a well-armed people that a tyrannical government cannot control. If the government disarms you, then they can tell you what to do. Our founding fathers knew this, and I don't think they were thinking about sport shooting, although I appreciate that and enjoy it myself. They were thinking about a well-armed people that could not be taken over by a tyrannical government.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hill. Miles Rahimi, you have 60 seconds on this.
Our Second Amendment is what our founders put in place to protect our predated rights. Oklahoma's a constitutional carry state, and I would love to introduce, after I'm elected, drawing a blank on the House number bill at the moment, but the bill that was just signed into place by Governor Stitt that would hold individuals liable for infringing on an anti-red flag law into place, if you will, because these unelected bureaucrats just want to. It's about power, and the only way that as a first-generation American, I can resolve our ability to protect ourselves, because my father fled from a tyrannical regime, is by owning weapons to defend our liberty.
All right, Shelley Landon, your turn. Any instances where someone should lose the Second Amendment right to carry a weapon?
I am a Second Amendment rights person from one end of my being to the other. My founding fathers took musket balls in their bosoms to defend this nation, and they understood what they were doing at that Constitutional Convention. And I believe that we are in a time when it is necessary for every American to understand how to properly handle a weapon, to get the training. They found out in some of these situations where people tried to fire back on shooters and mass shootings that a lot of the people who fired just weren't in practice. So I think that would be important, that we keep people up to speed, and maybe there's some kind of guidelines. I am concerned, however, about district attorney in Tulsa who told me about a cache of over 2,000 semi-automatic weapons that were in the hands of an imam at TU University. Then the whole thing got hushed up. I talked to the congressman out in Broken Arrow about that. I would like to know what kind of papers they were really carrying. And then some of the cache of weapons that are coming over the borders that have been seized by Islamic persons who were not American citizens fully immigrated. I think felons and folks like that and people who are mentally disabled, of course, should not be able to carry guns. But for the mainstay, we all need to be able to.
All right, let's go to candidate Jana Barisi now.
Well, I want to be clear. I completely support the Second Amendment. You know, I have received an A rating from the NRA. The only people they give endorsements to are legislators that have cast votes. So I have their best rating. I also answered surveys to gun owners of America and pledged my complete support also to their tenants as well. You know, we do have great laws that protect us against violent criminals and felons. And I think those are in place and those are sound. But these red flag laws are very, very dangerous. I am opposed to them. They deny due process. It's just a slippery slope to allow liberals to get control of guns. And it's something that I would never, never support. So we have some common sense laws. We need to go ahead and do that. As state superintendent, I led a task force that helped inform schools about their rights and the abilities of teachers and administrators to defend themselves in times of an active shooter situation. Unfortunately, this is something we have to be aware of in this day and time. And so I think it's very critical that concealed carry or that we have open carry and that everybody is equipped to know how to handle active shooter situations.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Parisi. Terry Neese.
I 100% support the Second Amendment because the Second Amendment enshrines our God-given right to defend ourselves. It's not something we can ignore when it becomes politically inconvenient. When I was growing up here in Oklahoma, we never locked our doors out on the farm, but we kept a gun at the front door and a gun at the back door. That's how we stayed safe. And I will fight to ensure other Americans are provided that same right. And I'll fight to make sure the Democrats don't try to take our guns away from us.
All right, Stephanie Bice, same question, 60 seconds.
Kelly, I am proud to be the only candidate in this race to be endorsed by the NRA. And the reason for that endorsement is I have proven my commitment to defending the Second Amendment in the state Senate. I believe that it is a constitutional right given to every American by our founding fathers. And I will do what I can as your next Congresswoman to continue to defend that from the Democrats who want to take gun ownership away from law-abiding citizens in this country.
All right, thank you. Jake Merrick.
Well, the Fifth Amendment says the federal government will not deprive someone of life, liberty, or property without due process. So we have the process in place. No one should be deprived of property or deprived of the right to keep their property without due process. And so I applaud our legislature here in Oklahoma. They passed 1081, which was the anti-red flag law. And, you know, I believe it should be a model for us to take to Washington and to use across the country, because no one should be flagged and their property taken away without due process.
Candidates, thank you. In fact, we have about 30 minutes left of our forum.
And again, you're doing a great job staying on time.
This next topic is very important. We're talking about the Black Lives Matter movement. It's gained new momentum after the death of George Floyd. So two-part question here. Do you understand the frustrations of Black people and minorities? And do you believe we need to reform policing? Mr. Hill, let's start with you.
Well, thank you. Great question. I'm not sure that I understand as myself what the people that feel oppressed, people of color, feel. It's probably impossible for me to fully understand that. I can try, and I want to hear, and I want to understand, but probably impossible for me. Even though my ancestors were Native American and I'm a citizen of the Cherokee Nation, no, probably hard for me to understand. But I'll tell you what, while our First Amendment protects our right to peaceably assemble to address our grievances against the government, our First Amendment does not protect us and does not provide us the opportunity to break windows, to set things on fire, to desecrate our national monuments, to steal, to beat police officers and innocent people. That is not what we're protected. That's not our First Amendment. And so while we need to encourage people to peaceably assemble and talk about the grievances they have, we need to absolutely stand together as Americans against the chaos and the anarchy and the criminal behavior that is going on most of the time after dark. And when I talk to Americans, they don't want to defund the police. They want to give the police greater funding so they can do a better job building relationships in these communities to provide more law and order for American citizens.
Thank you for answering both parts of that question. Now let's hear from Ms. Neese.
Look, I believe all lives matter. I know I work in Africa and in various parts around the world. And I know that all of a sudden that's a super controversial thing to say, but it's the truth. All lives do matter. The left seems determined to divide this country along racial lines, and we just can't let that happen. I'll say this. My door is always open to the people of this community. I've found jobs for over 37,000 people in my career, people from all sorts of backgrounds. That taught me that we have a lot more in common with each other than we have differences. And that gives me hope that we'll be able to heal a divided nation.
Ms. Neese, I want to give you a chance because you had a few more seconds there. Can you answer, do you think that we need to reform our police departments?
I believe that our law enforcement, I mean, obviously we have to restore law and order. It's a tragic situation of where we've been, but we must restore law and order. We have descended into mob rule. It's an extreme disappointment when we see our supposed leaders like Nancy Pelosi and Mitt Romney lock arms with domestic terrorists like Antifa and join in opposition against our law enforcement. What I will do when I go to Congress is restore law and order and support our great law enforcement.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Landon, two questions for you, two parts. Do you understand the frustration? And also, do you believe we need to reform our policing?
Yes, I do understand the frustration. And I have a nephew that is a sheriff, another one that has been in White House security in charge of disaster relief in Washington, D.C., part of the National Guard. And I really applaud our police force. I believe they do a tremendous job. I think the ones that stray, that misuse it, give them the full weight of what punishment comes with it. But I think that one of the things that needs to be restored is our history and the understanding of it. I have a PhD in history and I'm majoring in the area of Christian American heritage. And I understand from talking to my dear friend Alveda King, who has been a tremendous blessing to me, what the devastating factors are. Her uncle was murdered with her father, that was Martin Luther King. And in my background, my 11th grade grandfather, Sir John Hawkins, unfortunately, was right there when slavery began, when a British ship was attacked by a Portuguese ship. The thing you do is run down into the cargo hold and bring the cargo up for whoever, has commissioned you. And when they did, they found Black men, women, and children suffocating. They wanted them to take them back to where they came from. When they delivered them back to the coast of Africa, they were shocked because those people didn't want to get off the ship because Muslims who had sold them into slavery in the first place came after them with machetes. So you've got a situation right now. I'm trained in national security, and you look at what could bubble up under the carpet after 9/11 in that same configuration of terrorism if we get rid of our police force. We need to restore law and order.
And the same question for Ms. Barisi. You have 60 seconds.
All of us mourn the loss of Americans that have been lost because of all the violence that has occurred. I will always support the right of anyone to peacefully protest, but I completely reject the actions of anarchists and terrorists that are trying to tear our country down and tear up our institutions. Everyone wants to feel safe in their own home and in their communities. And I believe in the rule of law. I also believe in a strong police force. So any idea that we should defund or divert funds for police is something I completely reject. As a matter of fact, we need to increase funding for police. We need to increase funding so they can develop innovative policing models, so they can better recruit individuals of color so they can reflect the communities that they serve. We need to add money to community outreach. This is in giving them advanced training on how to deal with violent offenders. Over the last 25 years, I have spent my time on providing excellent educational options for children in poverty who are trapped in poor performing schools. I have worked within the Black community. I have talked to several of their leadership during this period of time, and they are very upset about all of the terrorism that is going on. They think it is putting a rift between them and their communities and the police force. They've been working on healing all of that.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to let you finish that thought. You went over the 60 seconds, so we'll give another 60 seconds to our next candidate, Ms. Bice. Go ahead.
Well, thank you, Amanda. The first part of your question, do I understand minorities' position? And the answer is not really, although I want to understand. Look, I am not the mother of an African-American teenage boy that walks out the door every day and worries about something happening to her son. But we have to have some really tough conversations in this country about race and how we get over the racial bias that many of us have. The idea of police force across this country supporting law enforcement, this notion that the Democrats have been pushing about defunding police is absolutely ludicrous. We do need to be giving our police forces more funding. And the reason is better training. I was having a conversation with my neighbor who is a 30-plus year member of law enforcement here in the Oklahoma City area. And he said he's blessed to have a police force that does 4 trainings a year to address things like the de-escalation tactics or trying to deal with mental health and substance abuse issues out in the field. But he's actually an exception to the rule. Not every police force has that ability or the funding to do that. So we should be ensuring that our police are fully funded and that they are given the training they need to do their job effectively and keep our communities safe.
Okay, Mr. Merrick, your response.
I appreciate the question. I think it's something that we all need to be talking about. I believe it would be very presumptuous of me as a white man to say that I understand the Black community. I'm full of questions. I was down at the Black Lives Matter protest, and I was there to listen. I believe the Black Lives Matter organization is corrupt, but I do believe Black Lives Matter. And I went down there to be a presence, and I grabbed the megaphone, and I was able to tell the crowd. I was later invited to come to the steps of the Capitol and address the crowd. And I simply told them, I'm here as a white Republican male, and I want to hear from you. And that's why I went down there. My family and I, we go to All Nations Champions Church, and we're one of about 3 white families in the church. And we have an adopted son. He's not literally our son, but he's like our little girl's big brother, and he's African American. And we've been in constant communication with him saying, how are you feeling? What do you think about the situation? Because we need to have open ears and listen more than we're talking right now. I believe we need to increase the funding for our police. We do not need to defund. We need to increase the funding because they're working on a shoestring budget right now, and they're not able to do everything they need to do. But we do need to address things like mental health, especially in the law enforcement, because they deal with so much trauma and they suffer so much because of the trauma they suffer every day. So we need to increase funding to address that and to make sure they have all the tools they need to do their job effectively.
Okay. Thank you. I know there's a lot to talk about here, especially because we're asking 2 parts of a question, but I am going to move on to Mr. Rahimi. Your chance to respond.
You know, I don't think racism cares what color your skin is, where you're from. I'm a proud first-generation American. I'm half Iranian, and I've faced being targeted because of that. But Ephesians 4:32 is, as a follower of Christ, be kind to one another. And so all lives matter. But the reality is we need to take a step back and realize that in every occupation, there's going to be bad people. And I know that personally because in the Navy, I experienced that from leadership, from people who mistook their formal authority for a moral authority. And so we need to move forward. Is that I don't look at me being the victim. I'm sitting here as the victor because of the decisions I make moving forward. And I want to help inspire others in my reality of deciding what's ahead in my life.
And Mr. Pringle, do you understand the frustrations? And the second part to that question, do you believe we need to reform policing?
We do not. Well, there are some reforms the police department may make. If they've got a guy that's got 15 or 20 complaints against him, they need to get rid of him and not let the union keep him in there. But on the other hand, I feel that the blacks, the good common black people on the street are being used because I have to keep going back to this. I believe that we are in a revolution right now, and they want to take our guns. They want to take over our government. They don't want to get rid of our Constitution. And I believe that Mr. President Trump needs to put a halt on the FBI. They should know who the leaders of these people are and who's putting up the money. If they don't, they're not doing their job. And he should get rid of every one of those. It should goes back to clean the swamp. And my last comment on this is I think that he needs to bring out the troops. If you don't, it's going to get worse and worse and worse, and it isn't going to get any better because they're going to keep going until he brings out the troops and stops it.
And
I'd like to have more law enforcement people like Joe Arpaio.
Okay,
And
we're past our 60 seconds, and I want to give the last 60 seconds on this question to Mr. Ballard.
There's an old saying as well as an old song, you know, don't really criticize me until you walk a mile in my shoes. And I've never claimed to know what other people, other races, everything, every detail about them, their average, what goes on in their lives. But when I was in the United States Army, I had people from all different races, ages, creeds, that we all got along. We had no choice. We had to get along because in the military, it all depends on, you have to be able to trust everyone around you. And we got along great with each other. And as far as the training, the reform or any training, I'm against anything that defunds the police. Everyone's talking about we need more training for the police, but they turn right around and want to defund the police. It takes money to train the police officers correctly. Now, with that being said, the vast majority of the police officers, law enforcement, 99% of them are great, awesome people. It's only a few that are bad apples that gives everybody a bad name.
Thank you. We want to get right to our next question, and for that we go back out to our nation's capital.
And here's Oklahoma's own Alex Cameron.
It seems like it's become increasingly common for those challenging incumbents to portray compromise as a weakness, that it somehow involves compromising one's values. In Washington, very little, if nothing, gets done without compromise. Are you a person who would be willing to compromise, or would you always stand on principle?
We'll start with Mr. Hill. Would you look to compromise?
Well, let me be very clear. I've spent my life in business, and in business, you work with all kinds of people with all different attitudes and perspectives and leadership styles, but you have to get along to do business. If you demand all or nothing, you get nothing most of the time. So I would go to Washington and I would treat those across the aisle, and maybe those that I disagree with almost everything they say, I would still treat them with respect. And I would listen to them, and I would ask that they do the same for me. You know, I don't expect people from San Francisco to have the same values as people from Oklahoma. I don't expect AOC's voters to have the same values as Oklahoma City voters. But together, we have to work for what's good for America. Now, you have to understand, I also have principles that I won't compromise on. You know, the sanctity of life is important. God gives life. And if we give the government the authority to decide what life is precious and what life is not, we'll be shocked at the decisions they make. So all life is precious. It's precious all the time. So there are principles that I have, but absolutely, we would have to work together to move America forward.
All right, let's go to Terry Neese, 60 seconds.
You know, I will not compromise my values. And that's an important thing, because when you own a business, you must provide character and integrity to that business. That means I won't compromise my values. I'm a fighter who knows how to get things done. Look, I took $600 in my pocket and turned it into a business that has found jobs for 37,000 Oklahomans. That proves that I'm someone who knows how to get the job done. I can certainly sit down and talk with anybody, and that's what I'll do in Congress. And that's what makes me Kendra Horn's worst nightmare in November.
All right, Ms. Barisi, would you be able to work across the aisle?
You know, I have my value system, and I have my strong conservative values. And those are the two main things that, if I should be blessed enough to be your congresswoman, I with me to Washington. I also know that when you're dealing with all kinds of people, as I did in small business and as I have experienced when I was in office, you have to first of all listen to people and understand their concerns before you can come to a solution that is workable for all. That does not mean you ever have to compromise your principles, but you, through a thorough knowledge of the policy that you're dealing with, standing on conservative principles and working through your value system. And for me, that is those conservative values of smaller government, protecting life, making sure that we have a free market system, all of those kinds of things and opportunities for everyone. Those are the things that I'll be working with, but I'll always listen and reach out to others to be able to find solutions, but without compromising conservative principles.
All right, thank you, Ms. Barisi. Miles Rahimi, your turn.
You know, it seems anymore that conversation with someone else from across the aisle is near impossible because you're labeled as a bigot, sexist, or whatever. And until you can move past those talking points on the left, until you can dismiss them, you can't have a conversation. And look where compromising has gotten us this far. Is it's allowed us to rack up $20+ trillion in debt. It's allowed us to legislate ways that abortion continues, and it's allowed us to have our nation's survival become dependent on China. We need to draw a line in the sand and stand with our conservative values instead of capitulating to bad policy time and time again. The time for timidity and half measures is over.
Kelly Landon, would you be willing to work across the aisle?
Well, as your Congresswoman, if you elect me as such, it will be a great honor to return to the city that I have nicknamed long ago the City of Compromise. And I am the only candidate in this race who does not have a learning curve in front of me of how to construct, draft a bill, get a post office committee number on it, find the sponsors it needs on both sides of the House and the Senate and both sides of the equation, lobby it and push it through to a unanimous Senate vote, celebrate it on the Washington Mall. I've learned a lot, and not only there, but if you look on my bills and resolutions tab at landonforcongress.com, you'll see what else I've been heartily working on with all kinds of groups of people. But I've said long ago, if this nation continues to divide itself so severely down party lines, a nation divided against itself will not stand. Her enemies will rend her. They are laughing like hyenas on their haunches, watching us tear ourselves apart. There's an ethnicity of how to get along with people in business and how to honor this great Constitution that gave us the chance to go to Washington and represent you and have to listen to people with opinions we don't agree with. I won't budge on pro-life. I was trained by the founder, Dr. Mildred Jefferson. I won't budge against the gay marriage, and I won't budge against the wall and other matters of national defense.
All right, thank you, Ms. Landon. Stephanie Bice, your turn.
Well, thank you. I, too, believe that you can compromise without compromising your conservative values. I have done it in the state legislature. I have found ways to work not only with the other side of the aisle, but also sometimes with your own party to try to find solutions to very difficult issues. One of the most recent journeys that I had was tackling criminal justice reform, and that looks different for everyone. But I knew that it was an important aspect of what's happening in Oklahoma and that we needed to find some conservative solutions to address the issue. And I was able to get bipartisan support on the criminal justice reform bill that I ran. So you can compromise with both your own party and the other side and get things accomplished. And that's exactly what I plan to do in Washington.
All right, thank you. Jake Merrick, your turn.
I believe it's possible to remain firm on your principles and also work with people. And it starts with listening. It starts with being patient and being willing to hear their side and where they're coming from. This is what I've done for the last 20 years. You can't work in business and you can't be in ministry without having a listening ear. You've got to be able to sit down with someone that radically opposes your worldview and hear where they're coming from and try to work towards a solution. However, I do believe that we are in a mess right now in our country because we have compromised our principles. It's gone beyond just working across the aisle, and it has gone into compromising our principles. And I believe that whatever you compromise to keep, you will eventually lose. So I believe that if we compromise on our principles, we will eventually lose this nation.
All right, Michael Ballard, can you work across the aisle if voters send you to Washington?
Well, if the other side ever comes up with anything that doesn't shred our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, drag us down socialism, I might be willing to talk to the other side. But if they're pushing for socialism, shred our Second Amendment, our entire Bill of Rights, and weaken our military, I'm not willing to compromise my core beliefs or my conservative values.
All right, finally, Mr. Pringle, how do you feel about compromise?
That's a hard question to ask for an old guy like me, because I don't believe in compromising and giving up. A story I'd like to tell you, 1965, I had a deposit on a house I was selling, and the seller come out and wanted me to cut my commission about half in two. And I told him to go fly a kite, that I wasn't working for nothing. And my broker gave me accolades for doing that, but I lost at least half the sale, and that was my choice. I will not compromise on abortion. I will not compromise on the Second Amendment. I will not compromise on the military. As I said in another one of these forums, when I get up there, I'm going to be harder than a junkyard dog. I'm going to fight those Democrats until they just get damn tired of fighting with me. And we need more people like Judge Arpaio. Joe Arpaio is past sheriff of Arizona. and we just need more tough leadership in Washington, and that's all I can say about that.
Mr. Pringle, we appreciate that. Hard to believe, but we've already reached the end of our forum. It is now time for closing statements.
So just like we've been doing, each candidate will have 60 seconds. And let's begin with Terry Neese.
Well, thank you for having us. I appreciate your time. For years, when people in central Oklahoma needed a job, they called Terry Neese. They knew I would fight tooth and nail to make sure they got quality, good-paying jobs where their hard work would be rewarded. That's what our country needs right now. We need to get back to work. The people of the 5th District deserve a representative who knows how to get us back to work and will stand with President Trump to make it happen. I am that person. So I'm asking for your prayers and your vote on June 30th. Thank you, and God bless you.
All right, thank you. Candidate Jana Barisa, your final thoughts.
You know, we all knew that the year 2020 would be the most consequential year of our lifetime. We knew the importance of rallying the American people to fire Nancy Pelosi and assure that President Trump had a second term in office. But what we didn't know is that a virus originating in China would come on our shores and kill over 100,000 Americans and devastate our economy at a rate that none of us could have comprehended. Now, more than ever, we need a representative in Congress that will stand with President Trump, will fight for our workers and defend our conservative values. And now, more than ever, we need a courageous Congresswoman, an experienced leader, a tough leader who will defeat Kendra Horn and will stand up for you against Nancy Pelosi, the socialist. I am that woman. I have the courage to do what is right and the commitment to put America first. And on June 30th, I would be honored to have your vote.
And now let's hear from Shelley Landon for your final statement.
I have a strong faith in Jesus Christ, as did my forefathers. And as one of them at the Constitutional Convention spoke this: let us form a federal republic with a democratic form of government whereby the common man may assume he has a vote. I radiate that because that was based on the book of Hebrews and Numbers, and this Constitution and government coming forth out of it will not be able to do what they envisioned unless we stick with those biblical principles. At the Constitutional Convention, Psalm 127 was quoted by Benjamin Franklin: unless the Lord build the city, they labor in vain that build it. Unless the Lord watch the city, the watchman laboreth in vain. And Thomas Jefferson said, all that need be for tyrants to take control again is for good men to do nothing. I will stand for pro-life rights because Mildred Jefferson, my dear friend who founded it, taught me well. I have already fought in Washington, D.C. for 3 points against the Real ID so that I can prevent our information on non-encrypted cards from going into the hands of Alibaba in the United Arab Emirates with its Chinese partner on a non-encrypted code shipped offshore. So it will be a joy to protect you and help you get the jobs you need. And God bless you. I want your vote on
Thank you,
June
Ms.
30th.
Landon. We appreciate that. Now, final thoughts from Jake Merrick.
Well, if I'm anything, I'm a man of conviction, and I'm in this race because I'm deeply convicted that something has to be done. The conservative voice needs to get louder and more firm in where we stand. You know, I think there's a lot of issues that need to be addressed, but like President Trump told the group of evangelical leaders, that if you don't take advantage of this time, everything that he's been able to accomplish can be undone if a Democrat is elected to office. And so while it's important that we address all of the issues, from protecting the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, the border security, healthcare reform, infrastructure reform, and on and on and on, all of these things are vital and must be addressed. But there is an underlying evil that has to be addressed. We have to return to the standard. And a standard has already been set. 233 years ago, 39 men of extreme intellect and conviction wrote a document, our Constitution, that could only be superseded by the Bible on which it was based. We don't need a host of new laws. We need simply to return to the laws on which this republic was established. And this will ensure that this remains the greatest country in the world.
And our next 60 seconds will go to Charles Pringle. Mr. Pringle?
Yes, thank you. You know, I have been fighting this battle with this campaign, and I've been doing it all along. All of the leaders of the Republican Party have turned their back on me, except maybe one or two. They wouldn't give me any advice as to how to do this. When I first started, I said, what do I need to do? I went to the Election Commission. They said, well, you have to can't do anything until April. And then once I finally got in, they wouldn't help me. And I'm fighting this battle for the people of Oklahoma, and I have not asked anyone for any money. Now, I can tell you that whoever wins this case, if it's not me, in 2 years, they're going to be out there begging for money, looking for a way to get reelected. And that will not be me, because if I do what I'm supposed to do, the people of Oklahoma will reelect me in a heartbeat. And I've used this phrase before. When I get there, I'm going to be meaner than a junkyard dog. And Nancy Pelosi will wish she had never met me. Thank you very much, and I appreciate having this forum.
Thank you, Mr. Pringle. We appreciate it. Stephanie Bice, you're next. Final comments.
Well, thank you, Kelly and Amanda and News 9 for tonight. Oklahoma, I am fighting for you and for our conservative values so that we can return this seat to Republican control in November. I know how to win elections. I've done it twice. And in the state Senate, I have defended the Second Amendment. I have protected life. I have found ways to reduce the size of government and cut the red tape and bureaucracy. Thousands of people have invested in my campaign, and I believe it is going to take an army for us to take on Kendra Horn and the Democrats and Nancy Pelosi. I ask you to join me, join my campaign, and let us take this seat back from the Democrats in November. Please vote Stephanie Bice on June the 30th.
Thank you. And now let's go to Michael Ballard for your closing statement.
Yes, when I'm elected, one of the first things that I'm going to do is seek out Jim Jordan to be the next Speaker of the House and to join the Freedom Caucus. We can all agree that Kendra Horn's got to go. But with that being said, we need to replace her with not just anyone, people that's raised our taxes, brought in Common Core, people that don't even live in our district. We need good, God-fearing, constitutional conservative Republicans to replace Kendra Horn with. The unborn, the veterans, the forgotten men and women, the Constitution, and President Trump needs and deserves an ally, and I will be that ally. Please check out my website and my Facebook campaign page, Michael Ballard for Congress, and thank you everyone for participating and putting this event on. Thank you, and God bless each and every one of y'all.
Thank you, Mr. Ballard. Let's go to Miles Rahimi now. Final thoughts.
You know, I met with a vet today who called, and it seemed to me that he just wanted to feel like he was represented. Like most Oklahomans, I didn't inherit a business, and I wasn't born into wealth. I've had to work for everything I've got. No one had to convince me to join the military or to run for Congress. I'm doing this because I love our nation. My argument to you, the voter, is not vote for me. I'm not Kendra Horn. My argument is vote for me so you know someone is in Congress who values you, who understands you, and who's one of you. I will be at Wilshire Guns Caliber Club tomorrow evening from 6 to 8 p.m. I'd like you to join me. You can learn more about my America First platform at milesforoklahoma.com, and I'd love your vote on June 30th. But also, we don't need any more professional politicians. We don't need businessmen. We need a fighter.
And for our final statement, let's check in with David Hill.
Well, thank you so much for spending so much time with us this evening, and thank you for listening to us, and I really appreciate your time. This is a very important election. You have 9 options in front of you here, but you have one chance to fire Kendra Horn and get rid of Nancy Pelosi to get America back on track. Like President Trump, like Governor Stitt, I'm a businessman. I'm not a politician. We have to stop sending the political farm team to Washington who work for themselves, who build their own political careers, who build their own wealth on the back of good, hardworking Americans. I've got the business experience needed to get America back on track. I've been involved in heavy manufacturing and done business all around the world, providing high quality, high paying jobs and building the wealth of America. You know, we've had tough times and we've been through a serious crisis in America, but America is strong enough to beat this and get back on track. Vote for me, send me to Washington to be your next congressman. I can beat Kendra Horn and we can get America going again. Thank you very much for your time this evening.
Thank you, and thank you to all of our 9 candidates for spending this evening with us and educating us and all the voters out there. That does conclude our 5th District Republican Primary Forum. Early voting in this race starts tomorrow at your local county election office.
You can also vote early on Saturday. Polls open on Election Day at 7 in the morning, of course. Thank you for watching on News9.com, our app, and our Facebook page. If you haven't already, be sure to download our free streaming apps for your Apple TV and Roku. So glad you're all with us tonight. We'll see you at 10 o'clock on News 9.